Well, uh, I'm Badr Benjloun. It's my pleasure to meet you again in this new conference in the INRA webinar series dedicated to discuss trends and innovations in agriculture. First, I would like to welcome all the participants from different countries for taking the time to attend this webinar and probably also to enrich this session by their questions and comments. Then I would like to thank warmly our guest speaker, Dr. Pierre Taberle, for accepting our invitation to share his deep experience with us and to talk about this very exciting topic, which is environmental DNA. I will have the pleasure to introduce myself, Dr. Pierre Taberle, whom I know since a long time. And this presentation is not an easy task. This introduction of Dr. Pierre Tabelle, it's not an easy task. So, as I said before, I know Dr. Tabelle since 2008 when he visited our team as an expert in conservation genomics. And we made a 7 days journey traveling in many regions over Morocco. You remember, Pierre? This was the starting point of a great continuous collaboration with his team and his network. We implemented together many large collaborations that he coordinated, such as the very exciting and innovative European funded project NextGen. Well, as an introduction, Dr. Pierre Taberle studied biology and geology at the University of Grenoble. He was a biology teacher in a high school for 9 years. Then he obtained a PhD degree in 1992 from the University of Grenoble, and he got the habilitation a year later. He joined the National Center for Scientific Research, CNRS, in France in 1994. He has worked in the Laboratoire d'Écologie Alpine first as junior scientist for 4 years, and then as senior scientist for 20 years. He was the head of this laboratory for more than 10 years. So for the past 20 years, his research team has been working in the field of molecular ecology with emphasis on the phylogeography of wild animals and plants, on conservation genetics, development of non-invasive sampling, and on domestication of goats and sheep. During this period, he was the founder of many novel concepts in ecology that have known great success, such as landscape genetics, for example. So, and other concepts. More recently, he's involved in biodiversity assessment using DNA metabarcoding, using environmental samples, soil, water, for example, and new sequencing technologies. He is author or co-author of about 300 scientific publications in peer-reviewed journals. And he is a highly cited researcher with a niche index of 117, according to Google Scholar, and a number of citations of more than 60,000. He is currently senior editor of Molecular Ecology, associate editor of Science Advances. He received the Molecular Ecology Prize in 2007 and coordinated 3 large collaborative European projects. I can keep going and talking about his experience for a long time, but for the sake of time, I will stop here. And for sure, you can get information about his experience in the web. Before giving the floor to you, Dr. Taberli, to start this webinar, I would like to mention that the conference by Dr. Taberli will take up to 40 minutes, and then we will have the discussion that will take about 50 minutes. For the discussion, please post your written questions via the chat on MS Teams, and please inform your name and affiliation before the question. do not wait the end of the webinar to ask your questions. You can post your questions in English or in French. So we look forward to listening to you, Dr. Taberle, and to this exciting topic and to knowing more about it. The floor is to you, Dr. Taberle. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Badr. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So thank you very much, Badr, for this nice introduction. So, and for the invitation to this webinar. So, yes, first slide, please.
Yes.
Full screen. Okay, yes. So today I am going to talk about environmental DNA. Yes, the next slide. Okay. So environmental DNA is DNA that can be extracted from environmental samples, such as soil, sediment, water, or even air, without isolating any target organism at first. So, and when you extract DNA from such a mixture, you get a mess of DNA, I would say, coming from many different organisms, and the DNA is possibly degraded. And usually, environmental DNA contain both intracellular and extracellular DNA. So, next slide.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yes. So, the first mention of environmental DNA was in 1987, and it was an extraction protocol at this time. Okay, and then the first metabarcoding study was published by Giovannoni in 90. So it's a long time ago, but nobody was talking about this approach during about 10 years. And then microbiologists started to use DNA to describe a bacterial community. So it was just after the year 2000. The first mention was in 1998. So, and at this time, they called that metagenomics. So this means that they were just sequencing a lot with next generation sequencers. No, not next generation, with cloning and trying to get information about the bacteria. And then at the beginning of the year 2000s, all the microbiologists almost were involved in analyzing DNA from soil. Okay, so then in 2008, with Francesco Fisetola, we just demonstrated that it's possible to extract DNA from water and to get, it was a frog DNA at that time that we get. Then in 2010, 2009, actually, it was several papers on diet analysis using scats or feces as a source of DNA. And then since that time, it was a very strong increase of environmental DNA studies. Next slide, please. So when you analyze environmental DNA, there is 3 different protocols that you can use. The first one on the left is single species identification. So you extract DNA and then you try to detect a single species with a marker specific, species-specific marker. Okay, so today I will not talk about this kind of approach. On the right, you have the shotgun approach. So you extract DNA, you sequence everything, you get a lot of sequences, and then you can get information about the functional aspects and on the genomes. It's even possible to assemble some genomes using this approach. This is called metagenomics. Okay, and today, next slide, we will focus on metabarcoding. This means that it's you extract DNA, you amplify it, you sequence it, okay? You analyze the sequences, and then you can identify multiple taxa at once. Okay, if you look, yes, next slide. If you look on the web concerning the number of papers published and the number of citations concerning environmental metabarcoding in this case, okay? You see a very strong increase in the recent years. And this year, it will continue to increase because in 2021, we already have more papers published than last year. So now, today, it's about 3 papers per day that are published on environmental DNA. So this means that it's becoming difficult to follow the literature on this topic. But for sure, it will still increase, I think, during a few years at least. And so a lot of ecologists now are using this type of approach. Next slide. So to summarize the process, so you get some environmental sample in the field. So it can be soil, it can be water, air, and so on, or scats. You get some usually low quality DNA. Then you amplify this DNA with some markers that we call metabarcodes. You get some sequences, and based on these sequences that you get, you can identify, using a reference database, you can identify many organisms within a single experiment. It can be hundreds of organisms identified with a single experiment. So, and which is interesting to note at this stage, it's very simple at the technical level. There is a paradox, because when you look, everybody is able to sample in the field. Everybody using an extraction kit is able to extract DNA. DNA amplification is quite easy, and sequencing, you can outsource the sequencing without any problem. And then you have a few bioinformatics to carry out to identify the species. So it seems very simple, but actually this is relatively difficult to set up sound experiments. So I will go back to this topic at the end of my talk. Next slide. So now I will go through several examples just to show you what can be done with environmental DNA. Next slide. So the first I will talk about soil, DNA from soil. And I will spend a little bit of time on this paper that has just been published 2 days ago. It's very recent. Okay, next slide. Here is this paper. So it corresponds to analysis of complex trophic networks based on metabarcoding and based on soil from different agroecosystems. So next slide. So the objective of this paper was to really look at all the soil communities to see the impact of increasing land use intensity. Okay, and also to look at the food webs if there is some change along a gradient of land use intensity. So next slide. Next slide, thank you. So for this study, we sampled 16 soil from fields ranging from arable crops to grazed permanent grasslands. This represents a long-term management experiment performed by INRAE in France. Okay, they have some special fields where they know almost everything about these fields since quite a long time. We took 4 samples per type of fields. We call that biological replicates. This is very important to have biological replicates. I will also go back to this topic at the end of my talk. So this means that we had a total of 64 soil cores, 15 grams of soils per sample. Okay, then we extracted DNA using the phosphate buffer approach. It's a very easy way to extract DNA from soil, and it's targeting extracellular DNA. Okay. So, and then we used different metabarcoding markers. First, we use universal markers for bacteria, 1 for bacteria and archaea actually, and 2 for eukaryotes. And then we had specific markers for earthworms, columbola, oligoquates, insects, and plants, if I remember well. This was, I cannot read below on this slide. Okay, next slide, please. So basically, the whole protocol is summarized by this picture. So the first was to carry out some metabarcoding experiments using the soil. Okay. So then my colleagues, it's not myself, so don't ask me some questions about food webs later on. This is not my specialty and I will not be able to answer properly. So then it was some work to build networks, trophic interactions in the different soil, and then to look at the influence of the intensification of agriculture on these networks. Next slide. So we detected almost 400 taxa in each experimental field. Okay. Most of these taxa were identified at the genus or species level, 46 at the genus level and 41 at the species level. Why? Because the metabarcoding approach does not always allow an identification at the species level. So this means that some sequence that we get were specific for family, for genus, or for species. So the food webs were constructed, and it has been a lot of variation and diversity across the different experimental fields. And 8 out of 12 network analyses representing alpha diversity and network topology showed a significant response to agricultural intensification. Next slide. So here are the correlations, the results. And one point that is very important is that the richness, the taxon richness, genus or species, did not decrease with agricultural intensification. So this means that you have not a more diverse communities when you increase the human pressure in the fields. Okay, but you have some nice correlations. For example, trophic group richness decrease with the intensification. Okay, trophic group entropy also, and so on. Okay, so this means that there is some significant effect of the agricultural intensification. So next slide. So the conclusion. So agricultural intensification drives reductions in trophic group diversity, yes, but taxa richness remain unchanged. So we also observe a decrease in the prevalence of parasitic interactions with increasing agricultural pressure. Okay, and it appears that eDNA metabarcoding is quite efficient for visualizing complex soil communities and for analyzing the structural and functional relationship within the soil food webs. Yes, so there is almost no paper really talking really about or answering properly some ecological question, and the paper I just presented is one of the first going a little bit further than just presenting the results of the metabarcoding. Okay. Just a few words about earthworms, for example. Metabarcoding is very efficient to know earthworms communities, and it's even more efficient than the traditional approaches where you try to get the earthworm from soil using mustard components or stuff like that. Okay, and but when you sample for earthworms, you should sample at the surface, but also relatively deep to have the different earthworms community. Next slide. Yes, so now I will go to aquatic biodiversity. Next slide. Yes, I will just present a single paper and then two additional papers on this topic. So for fish, metabarcoding is working very well. It's quite easy, you know, to implement, and most of the paper, maybe 2/3 of the papers published on metabarcoding concern freshwater ecosystems, actually. So next slide. So this paper concerns the Rhone, fish from the Rhone River. As you can see, the Rhone River goes through the Lehmann, the Geneva Lake or Lehmann Lake. Okay, next slide. So the experimental design was the following: 59 sampling localities along the river. They take 2 samples per locality, so again, biological replicates, and they were filtering 30 liters of water per sample in a filtration capsule. Okay. They carried out 12 PCR per sample, technical replicates, again. And the metabarcode was a short 12S mitochondrial 12S DNA marker, and the sequencing was done on Illumina sequencer to get a lot of sequences. Okay, next slide. So here are the profile of the Rhône river with the location of the different sampling location in red, but also it was a lot of electrofishing carried out on the Rhône river at the same time. Next slide. And when you compare electrofishing with environmental DNA, so below with the round plots, here you have the electrofishing below, okay? And above, you have in red, you have metabarcoding with environmental DNA, okay? On the left, this is the number of the species richness, and actually the triangle, the blue triangles represents the cumulative electrofishing results, okay, about 10 electrofishing. And you see that environmental DNA provide more or less the same results than 10 electrofishing. So this is very important. So this means that it's less time consuming and it's much more efficient for getting the species richness, the diversity of fish, than the traditional electrofishing. Okay, next slide. Yes, also the question, so but there is some drawbacks. When you sample in a river, you get the fish that are above the sampling point. And the distance can be quite large between the fish and the sampling point. For example, as you have the Geneva Lake, in Geneva Lake, you have some fish of the genus Coregonus that are just living in lakes, not in rivers. Okay, but you can still find them maybe 50 to 100 kilometers downstream with a very low density, very low detection rate, you know, but you can still find them below. So this is something that you need to know. You need to know when you are working in rivers. So next slide, please. Okay, it's working in the same way for freshwater bivalves, for mollusks. So and for fish and mollusks, we know that we are working with cell remains that are released by fish and by mollusks into the water, okay? And recently we carried out some filtration experiments with membranes of different pore sizes. And for fish and probably bivalves, the 5-micron membranes was working well, but usually people are using much smaller pore size, 0.45 usually, but actually for fish it's not necessary. So this means that we are really working with cell remains for fish and bivalves. So for conservation purpose, it's much easier to detect bivalves with environmental DNA than with traditional approaches. Next slide. And also, there is a huge amount of work that has been done on diatoms, because you can estimate the water quality with a diatom index using metabarcoding, and you are even not able to identify to the species level the diatoms. You just have a reference using machine learning. You can teach the machine to find the diatom index without having to go to taxonomic identification. But you need a large reference database for that. But this is, I think in the future, this will be quite used in a lot of cases. So next slide. So now diet analysis. So sorry, I'm going to present a relatively old paper published in 2012. But actually there is not a lot of paper concerning domestic animals, concerning the diet of domestic animals. So, and this paper is quite interesting. It has been published in a journal called Fourage in French. Next slide. So it's in French, actually. It's not in English. And it has been, Fourage is a journal from INRA in France, I think. So next slide. So it was, the goal was to compare the diet of two cattle herds grazing in two different conditions, with low density of cattle in a field with a very high botanical diversity, okay, and in relatively high cattle density in a field with low botanical diversity. Actually, it was a field where they put Dactylis glomerata, poacée, grass, especially for cattle. So they were sampling 12 cows with a biological replicate, 2 samples from the same cows, and 12 cows for each type of field. So this means 24 with 2 samples, so 48 samples. Yes, concerning 48 samples, I would like to say that we carried out several studies now involving really thousands of samples. So with the metabarcoding approach, it's also possible to analyze very large sample set, and this is possible. The most we have done, I think that it's more than, it's almost 3,000 samples for a diet study in Scotland recently, and of carnivores. Okay, so you can really analyze a lot of samples. Thank you. Yes. So, and the metabarcoding was carried out using a plant marker, and as you can see, I put the species found in the two type of fields with the percentage of sequences obtained. So the percentage of sequences obtained more or less correspond to the initial proportion in the DNA extract. It's not perfect, but it should provide a relatively good quantitative aspect. So, and very surprisingly, the first plant species that was eaten in the high botanical diversity field was Helianthemum nummularium. And then you see several Fabaceae, 3 Fabaceae, Alchemia, Plantagola lanceolata, and then you can see the first Poaceae with just a little bit more than 1% of sequence frequency, which is quite low. So they were expecting much more Poaceae globally than other Fabaceae or other plant species, you know. And even in the field with really a lot of Dactylis glomerata, because they put it on purpose in the field. So Dactylis glomerata was just 6% of the total. So what does this mean? This means that cattle, if they can avoid grass, they avoid grass, and they were eating forbs mainly. Okay, so this is quite important, and it was really counterintuitive for people having these cows. Obviously, if cows have no choice, they will eat grasses, okay? But if they have the choice, they will mainly eat forbs. Next slide, please. Okay, so the diet obviously is more diverse in the field with higher botanical diversity. So the low consumption of Poaceae is a surprise, actually, and very high consumption of Helianthemum nummularium. It was nice because we also carried out some chamois diet analysis in French Alps, and chamois were also eating a lot of Helianthemum nummularium when they have the choice. Okay, so it's interesting, and this is very easy to implement, this type of study. So I think that it can be useful in Morocco to know exactly the diet of sheep and goats. Okay, next slide. Okay, and last type of papers that I will present is the assessment of past ecosystems using lake sediments. This is also an area that is quite developing quite quickly now. Next slide. So I will present two papers based on the same data set, actually. So the first one focusing on livestock, and next slide. The second one focusing on plant species, so plant communities. Next slide. So I will talk about sediments from this lake that is at 2,400 meters of altitude in French Alps. Okay, you can see the location. You can see that the catchment is not very big. Okay, and you can see on the picture the catchment. Yes, next slide. We analyzed 47 slices of a 20-meter long lake core corresponding to the past 10,000 years. We cannot go further because it was glaciated before, okay? So this means that this is the full history after the deglaciation, actually. We used two metabarcodes, two DNA markers, one for plants, the classical we are using, okay? This is a chloroplast DNA marker for plants, and a short mitochondrial DNA marker for mammals. Okay, we carried out 2 extractions per slice, okay, and 4 PCR per extraction. So this means that for each slice, we had a total of 8 results, 8 PCR at the end. Next slide. So just to show you the type of core we are working on, and we had to be very careful of not contaminating the sample during the extraction process. So we had a special design for removing a piece of slice, and also we burn the 2 pieces of metal before taking out the piece of the core, the slice of the core. Next slide. And this is also, yes, to avoid contamination, we really need to work as in ancient DNA extraction lab, being very, very careful about potential contamination. And for each slice, we carried out 2 extractions, and we cut in 4 parts the slide. It's on the bottom up, yes, on the left of the slide. And we put the opposite quarter in each in the different Falcon tubes. Okay, and then it was this type of biological replicate are very important, because if you can easily produce random results with this type of approach, and to be sure that your results are not random, it's you must have some biological replicates. So next slide. So when we look at the environment before that our colleagues had about this lake, you can see, we put here the erosion signal that they are able to deduce from the core, looking at the size, I think, of the particles or things like that. And they have the erosion signal at the regional scale below, Lac Bourget, okay? And in Lac Anterne, you can see at the end of the orange part, you see a very strong erosion signal that doesn't appear at the regional scale. And the climate below was relatively stable at that time, so it's not a climatic effect. And the colleagues working on the course, they didn't know at that time why it was a so strong erosion signal at the Roman period, more or less. Okay, next slide. And finally, we had the results when we were looking at cattle and sheep DNA. So we realized that it was a lot of cattle and sheep DNA just before this very strong erosion signal at the end of the Roman time. Okay, then almost no farm animal for a while, and then it started again mainly with cattle in the Middle Age. But this means that at the Roman time, it was the Romans were probably doing some overgrazing that completely destroy the environment, leading to this very strong erosion signal. And then it took a few hundred years to recover properly for being able to put again some animals in this area. So this means that we have evidence of overgrazing even at the Roman time. Next slide. So, and we have the same type of results for different plant species. And you can see so this looks like pollen results from cores, but actually this is DNA results. And you see that 2000 years ago, or a little bit more, you have a change in plant community. But which is interesting is that look at the pinus. So 6,000 years ago, it was probably a pinus forest in this area. And you have also Achillea macrophylla that is typical from pine forest, okay, at that time. So next slide. So this means that this lake that is now like that, so was surrounded by a pine forest 6,000 years ago. Next slide. Okay, and then you have all the plant species linked to grazing, presence of farm animals that appear at the same time that you can see cattle and sheep populations. Okay, next slide. So now I will spend a few minutes on the importance of experimental design to finish my talk. So if you want to carry out some metabarcoding experiments, I strongly suggest you, next slide, to read, yes, first, to take into account the fact that you need to replicate. So you need to have biological replicates and technical replicates for sure. Okay, this is very important. If you don't have it, you might just analyze some noise without knowing that you are doing it. Okay, next slide. So I strongly suggest you to read this paper. This is an editorial that we published in Molecular Ecology 2 years ago. Why? Because we received in Molecular Ecology a lot of metabarcoding papers that we had to reject without review because colleagues were not using biological replicate or technical replicates. And so, and we had to reject these papers without reviews, but the authors were complaining because they said, oh, this paper published in Nature or in Science or in Nature Communications use exactly the same protocol and it has been published. So, but now, at least in molecular ecology, I think we will not accept any more papers that do not respect some minimum some minimum quality on experimental design. Next slide. Okay, so at each step of the workflow of DNA metabarcoding, you can have some bias. For example, if you sample in the field, you are not sure to capture all the local communities. You might just subsample the community, and it's very important to know exactly which proportion of the local community you sample per sample, because maybe you will need 4, 5, 10 samples to describe properly the community. For example, in tropical forest, we made some experiments with large-scale experiments, and we realized that if you want to describe the local diversity properly, you need 50 soil samples, more or less. If you sample less, you don't catch the local diversity properly. Okay, then you can also have some problems at the DNA extraction. Maybe your extraction protocol with preferentially extract some organisms and not the other ones. So you need to check for that. During PCR, you have the polymerase are making a lot of errors, or you can use even the wrong metabarcode, a metabarcode that is not amplifying properly what you target. So, and then there is more tricky problems during the sequencing, because you can have a mixing of the samples, more or less. We call that tag jumps, but you need to read more about this topic if you want to understand. But this means that you can have some tricky problems that you need to control with having appropriate controls for that. And then at the bioinformatic level, you can also make mistakes. There is a well-known, highly cited paper in metabarcoding that rivers are conveyor belt of biodiversity from the whole catchment. So, but almost everything is wrong because they make some big mistakes at the bioinformatic level. They were identifying families with too short sequences, and so they had a huge diversity, but actually it was just, we reanalyzed this data set, and it was just 20% of the diversities that should have been recorded and not as they claimed. Okay, so it's at each step, it's possible to make mistakes. So next slide. So it's very important to have some pilot experiments to have an idea of the diversity you capture, and also if everything is working well, if you can spot some potential problems. It's important to have enough biological replicates, at least 2. So it's true that if you have 2,000 samples, maybe you are not obliged to replicate all of them. Maybe you can replicate just 100 of them, checking that it's consistent, and then for the rest, it should be okay. You should have enough technical replicates, so this means extractions or PCR. We never carry out less than 3 PCR, actually. Okay, because if you have just 2, and if that doesn't fit together, you don't know which one is the correct one. If you have 3, then you have an idea about what is going on. So it's important to have many extraction controls for the sporadic contamination, many negative controls to detect potential also sporadic contaminations. It's also important to have positive controls. Okay. So it's also important to have all the potential controls to do. So obviously we never have enough, but if you want to trust your results, you need to be sure that you are not producing random or contaminated things. Okay, next slide. So to conclude, so there is a huge potential for metabarcoding, but there is, I would say, relatively big problems because of the PCR mistakes, PCR errors, and sequencing errors. This means that you inflate the alpha diversity that you get. Okay, so it's important to try to calibrate almost with some known positive controls the level of mistakes that you generate. And also, as you are producing some errors, then it's difficult to detect rare species because you don't know if it's a sequencing error or if it's a real rare species. No, so this is not easy. Next slide. So if you want to know more, you can have a look to the book we published 3 years ago, okay, where we try to give a lot of details about the techniques, the potential problems, and so on. We decided to publish a book and not to have a collection of chapters written by different scientists, just to have some consistency among the book. So this book is still, you can still get it from Oxford University Press. So next slide, and thank you for your attention. Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Taberlet. Thank you, Pierre, for this very rich presentation. It was a very interesting presentation with many new knowledge for me. For example, personally, I learned a lot. I will look at the chat if there is some question. Okay, the first two questions from Dr. Farahi Muha. The first one, by using the eDNA, can we follow the plant-animal species evolution, mainly the species extinction, to assess the climate change effect?
Yes, so this type of things can be done using lake sediments. So I know that my colleague Rachid Chedadi, initially from Morocco, but now working in France, was doing some lake course in Morocco, okay, to reconstruct past ecosystems, and it was to follow cedars presence or not in different areas. Okay, so and it's possible, yes, to look at the presence or absence of different species according to time using environmental DNA from lake sediments. Yes, and I see the second question. Control method for current and future. Yes, this is a good idea. Can we think about yes, using eDNA for trying to trace plant diseases? I think that maybe you have a chance to detect it before it appeared phenotypically. You know, you can see if some DNA of parasite or is already present or not. So maybe this is something that can be done later on.
Yes. Okay. You answered the second question. There is no more question in the yes. So
no, but I can add something.
Okay.
If some of the participants they want to develop some environmental DNA study, so we are open to advice about marker to use or about experimental design. Okay, we are because when you start such kind of things, it's not obvious to know all the potential tricks, I would say, and it's better, yes, so we are open and we will answer questions without any problem.
So I saw that Bazidaz Rashida has a question. Maybe she wants to ask it directly. Please, my colleague Boutena, to give her the floor. Rashida?
Yes.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Thank you, Sir Badr. Thank you, Monsieur Talbert, for the nice, interesting conference. I am Bazidaz Rashida, graduated from Yafi Hassan II, specialty biotechnologies and genetic amelioration of agriculture production. I have two questions, if you let me. First, clarify the next generation sequencing. It is relating to the tool of BLAST. And if we can use the eDNA to determine the PGPR, the plant growth promoting residuum, and predict which fungi or bacteria is more efficient for the growth of plants. Thank you, sir.
I don't understand your first question about next generation sequencing.
Yes.
No, it's sequencing mainly based at the moment on Illumina sequencers that produce millions of sequence suites, relatively short ones. Okay. So, but Badr can help for that. I think he is quite involved in this type of things. Okay, and then obviously you can identify a fungi and bacteria or all type of organisms from the roots of some plants with this approach. But it's yes, but yes, you can carry also metabarcoding on roots to see what is inside or around. this has been used, I think, already.
Thank you. Thank you,
Rashida. If there is no other question, I have one. Pierre, when we saw the figure with the evolution of the number of papers and citation in the field, you said that it's mainly linked. They are mainly linked to the protocols, to the methodology, and so on. I was expecting to have more applications to use this technique in many questions, relevant questions in agriculture and so on. But
no, I think it's a field. Yes,
there is a few studies taking the advantage of these techniques to study the health of soil or other things.
yes. So it's true.
Yeah.
When I prepared my talk, I wanted to focus on agriculture mainly, but it was not easy, you know, because there is not a lot of paper really dealing with meaningful agricultural results. And finally, for the diet, I had to go back to a relatively old papers published in our lab, but also the same with the first paper that I presented. It was the almost only one that go behind the metabarcoding, you know, to solve and to understand some processes, but mainly it's technical improvement that are published and the potential to say, hey, we can do that with environmental DNA. But the real implementation of environmental DNA now is mainly for fish, to have the fish community, and with diatoms to assess water quality. Okay, so this is the two areas where maybe it will be involved for the monitoring in the relatively short term.
Mm-hmm.
But it's true that everything is still in development. And yes, one of the difficulty is that it's very difficult to have a standardized protocol for every type of questions. The protocol, the experimental design must be adjusted to the scientific question, really. And I think that this is one of the problems because why? First, you know, there is a delay of 10 years between the. So 10 years ago, we had all the technical tools to do what we are doing today for metabarcoding, okay? And why it took so long? Because you need, so a single scientist has some difficulties to do everything, every step alone. Also, you need to have somebody good in the field and knowing the scientific question to adjust the sampling properly. Then you need somebody good at the bench in the lab to do the extractions, PCR, and so on. You need to have somebody good in bioinformatics to analyze the millions of sequence reads that you get. And then you have to go back with colleagues that are, so this means that you need to have more or less a team, and it's not obvious to set up this type of team very quickly.
Mm-hmm. The other question: have this field profited from the new developments in sequencing technologies? For example, the development of the Oxford nanopore technologies, for example, and also from the bioinformatic increasing or informatic increasing. Do you think that it could give this field a chance to explain its potential?
Yes. My feeling is that, you know, now when you start a metabarcoding study, you need several months before having the results, more or less. Okay, so I think that we will shorten this time, and I think that even now there is a few papers that talk about having the results straight in the field based on nanopore sequencing. Mm-hmm. Okay, and also with the Illumina sequencing, the length of the metabarcode is limited. because the sequence suite doesn't go really above 250 base pair. Okay, with nanopore this is not the case, so we might use longer markers, and with longer markers it's easier at the bioinformatic level to identify species, because you have linkage disequilibrium between SNPs or stuff like that that can help. So this means that we might go towards longer markers in the near future and detection even in the field. And with some cheap approaches with environmental DNA, for example, to detect a parasite in the field, there is some techniques that can be applied and you can get the results in a few hours in the field.
From the DNA, from the collection of samples to getting the results.
Yes, for example, but if you are looking for a specific organisms, you can know if it's present or not in the field.
So in plant pathology, this could be very...
Yes, for example, yes, it's possible to develop some tests based on the LAMP approach, loop amplified mediated amplification.
Okay, so there is other questions from the participants?
So don't hesitate to contact us if you need, if you have questions later on, or if you want to set up some experiments, we can help for that. So no problem at all.
Perfect. So if there is no more questions, I would like to thank you warmly, Dr. Taberle, for this presentation and for this new knowledge. I hope this can help and this can enhance some future collaboration with my colleagues, for example, or some participants and your lab and your team to answer relevant questions in agriculture and for the development of the agriculture in our country and also in the other countries. So thank you very much, Dr. Taberle. At the end, also, I would like to thank the participants for their participation, and looking forward to see you in the next webinars. The next webinar will be given by my colleague, Dr. Hassan Sidra. My colleague will show the flyer. So it will be entitled Principles, it will be in French actually, Principales luttes directes et indirectes contre le bayoud, acquis et perspectives. Ça va relater un peu les résultats de recherche de mon collègue Dr. Moulay Hassan Sidra. I welcome all of you, and also you, Dr. Taberle, if you are interested in the field. We will be happy to have you also in our webinar. So please save the date. The webinar series is organized every other Thursday at 10 in the same time. So we will have this next webinar in 2 weeks, the Thursday at 10 o'clock time in Morocco. So thank you very much for your participation, and thanks again, Dr. Taberle, for your presentation, for your webinar. So see you later.
So
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.